Hello and welcome to the channel. So we've got a Wem Dominator MK3. Not done one of these for a while. This is one of my own, and we've seen this one before. I use this for experiments, bits and bobs, and we are going to do some more experimenting with it. The last time this appeared on the channel, we put some Russian 6P18Ps into it. I'm going to remove those because I've found some very nice tubes, valves to go in here, and they are Mullards, military grade Mullards, and they are very cheap. So the reason I'm doing this video is, one, to help the company that's sold me these tubes, which is Langrex. Not that they know that, because I've not contacted them, but I just thought I'd help them sell a few of these tubes, and they're great tubes. And secondly, to help you lot out there, because obviously tubes are getting really expensive now, and it's a chance to get some really cheap tubes that are really top-notch quality, that will work really well in this amp, and we don't have to change too much to get them to work. Right, let's get it out the cabinet, and we'll get it on the bench so we can have a look. So we've got it on the bench, and you can see that I've done quite a lot of work to this amp over time, and here are the tubes that we're going to remove, that we put in, and we added these screen resistors on there because these amps never had them on. And there's not a deal of gap under this chassis from this board. Now then, so we need to be looking at these tubes that we've bought then, and these tubes are CV 4039. They dissipate 12 watts, that's its maximum dissipation. And we're going to get the data sheet and have a bit of a moochis at it. So let's just unravel one. So there we can see there we are. So that focus, CV 4039. So that's what we're going to be using. Now you can see these plastic protectors for the pins. So here's a tip for the day. You've got one of these on each tube. If you glue them together, you can make yourself a pin straightener, and here's one I prepared earlier, like so. Or you can even, if you've got more of these, you can glue 3 of them together, but 2 should be enough. So they make good pin straighteners. Tip for the day. Tune in for more great tips. So what do we need to do then to get these tubes fitted? Well, we need the data sheets, which I've got as well, but we need to lift this chassis off the board, which we'll do, which is pretty easy to do. And you can see I've added a few things on this amp. So for instance, we've got an HT fuse and so on. Obviously it's all been recapped. So let's look at the data sheet. A bit less light, and we should be able to hone in and have a look. Now, these military tube data sheets are a little bit typewriterish, as I like to call them. So some of the more important information when we're looking at these tubes, the first thing is the voltages and the currents. So the heater current is the one thing you have to look at. 750 milliamps. So we're comparing this with the tubes that we're replacing. Anode voltage, now when you see this 0 here, that means cold. So that's the maximum voltage that hits these tubes when it's cold, or the maximum allowed. And that's 500 volts. We're not going to have any problems with that with this amp. The plate volts, if we hold that still, is 300 volts. And the screen volts is 250. That's with the amp running, obviously. Anode dissipation, 12 watts. Screen dissipation, 2 watts. That's really most of the information that we need in this amp, because we already know that most of that information matches what we're removing, which for you would be the EL84. Now, the difference being we've got 50 volts less on the screen. So these voltages are measured from plate to cathode, if it's cathode biased. This amp is. So we're looking at 250 volts for the screens. Now, if we look at an EL84, if we just... So this just means 550 volts cold when it's switched on. Before the tubes conduct, we're not really going to have a problem with that. So anode voltage maximum 300 volts. 300 volts there. Maximum dissipation 12, so that's the same. Grid 2 max, again, not a problem with that. And then we've got grid 2 at 300 volts. So we've got 50 volts more tolerance on this tube than we've got on our CV4039. No problem with the heater voltages, because I can tell you that an EL84 is 760 milliamps. So we're going to save 20 milliamps just putting these tubes in. 20 milliamps draw less on the transformer, which is always good if you can get away with it. So how do we fit these tubes then? So this is the pinout for the EL84. If you got the very early Mullards in, you may find that the connection is on pin 1, and I think the early ones, the early Dominators, did have that because they were using the Mullard tubes. In a Mullard tube, pin 1 and 2 are connected together in some of the early Mullards. From what I can gather, I know I've changed them over before, it's a while since I've done it. So grid 1 will take us pin 2, because it should be. So if you put modern tubes into one of these and that's wired to pin 1, it won't work. You have to move that wire to pin 2. That's the grid for the grid. So grid 1, pin 2. Now cathode and grid 3 are connected together in this tube. Here, grid 3, if we look, follow this line down, you can see that is the cathode and it's connected to the cathode. So in this diagram, for anybody who doesn't know, that's the anode, or the plate. The English tend to call it anode, the Americans tend to call it plate. I call it plate. Grid 3, grid 2 and grid 1. So grid 3 is connected to this symbol, which is the cathode. These are the heaters. So that's internally connected on that tube. Grid 2 is the screen. So 300 volts for the EL84, 250 volts for our CV4039. And then this is the grid. So this would be pin 2. This would be pin 9. Grid 2 is the screen. We often call that the screen. The correct term for it is grid 2. So grid 2 is pin 9. Anode is pin 7. Count those round. Obviously the filaments are 4 and 5. No internal connection on 6 and internal connection on 1. And that's what makes it difficult to put screen resistors on this amp, which is a, say, a 1k resistor from pin 9, and then you connect the screen feed on the other side of it. And what they do on most tubes is you'll find one of these pins will be just no connection, so there'll be nothing connected to it. There's obviously something connected to these because they're internally connected. IC internal connection. and pin 8 is the same. So you can't tag onto these tubes, wire your screen feed to say there, because that was no connection, and then connect the resistor to pin 9. You can't do that. A lot of tubes you can, which is why when I put these screen resistors on, I've had to put them here. Now you can just connect on there and add the wire there, but I wouldn't advise it because they're floating around, and I don't like that with that sort of voltage. If it's low voltage, it's just a, you know, you're feeding a grid or something, it's fine. So let's have a look at the pinout, and we haven't really got a diagram for this tube, but we have got, if we just look, we go in, and now we're looking at this part of the diagram here. So the anode there is pin 1, no connection for pin 2, useful. Pin 3, suppressor grid, that's grid 3. Notice that is not connected to the cathode. 4 and 5 are the filaments, they're the same. 6 is the screen grid, which is grid 2, you can see there. 7 is the cathode, and then we've got 8 and 9 connected together for the grid 1 control grid. So any grid 1 there you can see, so either 8 or 9 you can connect to there. So fitting these tubes, then the first thing is you need to connect pin 3 to pin 7. Because the suppressor grid is not internally connected to the cathode, you have to connect it on the tube base, on the pins. If you don't, the amp will just be unstable and won't run correctly. So you must connect pin 3 to pin 7. That's the first thing. So if we're looking at the, and we'll go through this again, but if we're looking at the tube sockets underneath where they're wired, and it'll have to tip this upside down to do that when we've removed it from its base, we need to take pin 7 wire and connect it to pin 1. Pin 3 is connected to pin 7. So pin 3, which will be the cathode on the EL84, will need to go to pin 7. Pins 4 and 5 will be the same. Pin 9, which will be the grid on the EL84, will have to be connected to pin 6. And then pin 2 on the EL84 will be connected to pin 8 or 9 on there. So that's how that works. So hurdles, well, there's only really one, and that is the 50 volts less on the screen. Remember, on the grid 2 we've only got a maximum of 250 volts. It's never a good idea to overvolt the screens, although they do on the EL84s massively, but we're not going to do that on here. So how do we reduce the screen voltage? Well, that's quite simple. This resistor here is from node 1 to node 2. Node 2 feeds the screens. So if we just increase this resistor, and that will reduce the screen voltage. Now I've already increased this to 2.2k. On yours it should be 1.5k. So that's how we get around that problem, and that's sound. So I always recommend using screen resistors on the tubes, and the advantage on this amp is that pin 2 is no connection. So instead of connecting your wire from pin 9 on the EL84, we're going to move that up to pin 2 instead. Now it's not connected to anything, and then we take our resistor, which is, we could have 1k, and we could connect one end of the resistor to pin 2, and then we connect the other end to pin 6, and then your screen is connected up. Screen resistors really need to be on the tube bases if possible. Obviously there were no way we could do that with the L84s. Now these 6P18Ps, you can also connect the screen resistors to the tube base. Downside Well, these tubes are the same pinout as an EL84, apart from the internal connection of grid 3, which again you have to connect these across the base. But the reason I put the screen resistors here was because if someone looked at this tube online on the data sheet and discovered that it was the same pinout, then they would stick in two EL84s, and then what would happen is that if you've used, I think on the 6P18P, pin 6 might be no connection. If you've used pin 6 to connect your screen resistor to, and then connected it to pin 9, and then someone puts some EL84s in it, pin 6 is internal connection, and so therefore there would be a bang, or it certainly wouldn't work properly depending where that internal connection was. So I had to put these on as a precaution. Now when we're fitting these tubes, the pin connections are totally different. So when someone looks online, assuming this amp gets sold, let's just say 5 years down the line, one of these tubes blows, someone looks online and sees it's wired completely different, they're going to be inclined to chase down and get the right tubes for it. But in this instance, they may think, oh well, we'll just stick some EL84s in it, not having enough knowledge to know that the screen resistor's wired on the bottom, and that would be a problem. So that's why I did this here. We can remove this now. Anybody who wants to put EL84s back in their amp after they've done these, they're going to have to rewire it. And so if a tech's rewiring it, he'll spot that screen resistor straight away and know that it's got to be removed. Lot of waffling there. So let's get on and strip this amp down, and we'll get these tubes out. We'll remove all of this. Right, so we've got it off the board, and you just need to feed the power cable through, because remember that the plug's on the amp, so the power cable's not going to come completely through. But if you thread it right down along the length of the cable, you can get it onto the floor. So let's just tip it upside down and have a smooches, so you can see our tube sockets there. So that's where we're going to be rewiring. Now the pilot light has started to fall apart, and a bit of it's just fell off there as well, so I'm going to have to address that as well. Right, so there's the tube sockets, and that's where we've got to focus on moving the wires around for these tube bases. So here we have our diagram. So we need to put the iron on. Now the thing not to do on this is not to just take all the wires off, otherwise you're going to be tracing back where each one of them goes, which won't be fun. Here's pin 9 and here's pin 1. So you're counting clockwise 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So pin 1, there's nothing connected to it unless your grid wire, grid 1, is connected there, and that'll only be if it's a very early Wem with the Mullards in. Otherwise it'll be connected to pin 2. Pin 3 is the cathode, that's the purple wire, and you can write down the colours if it helps as well. Pins 4 and 5 are the filaments, you don't need to touch those can stay. So that's 2 of the 9 pins sorted out already, because they're just the same. The anode is pin 7. Pin 8, there is nothing's connected to it, that's internal connection. And pin 6 is also internal connection. So we need to change some wires around, don't we? So let's start with these one at a time then. And the simplest one to start with is the anode, and the simple reason for that is that it's pin 1 on this tube, and pin 1 isn't connected, so we can just swap pin 7 over to pin 1, and that's given us a start. Right, so I've just unsoldered pin 7. We've had that coiled around there, so we've got way too much cable on, so we'll just trim that so it fits. And if anyone ever wants to put this back to EL84s, there's plenty of cable left on there still. Right, that's one on there, and you need to watch this wire, because if you have the iron on it too long, the insulation will melt. It's a bit cheapy. Now the next one, and it's a good idea if you're doing this, is to cross off what you've done. So anode is probably the most important one. It's certainly the highest in voltage, so if we put a tick there to say that we've done the anode, pin 2 is no connection. On the EL84, pin 2 is the control grid, so we'll remove pin 2 and we'll solder it onto pin 8, because at the moment pin 9 is still taken with the screen there, grid 2. So that's the next job, and that is this white and black wire here, this striped wire. So we're going to remove him from pin 2 and put him on pin 8. Now we need to clean pin 8 because it's never been used, so it'll have 50 years of patina on it. So we'll just get just a small file. We'll do something like that just to clean it off. That's all you've got to do to get that off of there, and then just solder your wire on. Now just bear in mind that I'm showing this. If you're not confident about wiring this, you're not proficient at soldering, or you're not confident with the amount of voltage that's on here, don't attempt this. Get a tech to do it for you. I'm always dubious about showing these things, but just a disclaimer there, don't attempt this unless you're competent at wiring. Remember, this is not a lesson in soldering, and it's not a lesson in connecting tube bases, anything else, or lesson in voltages. I assume that you know that these are higher voltages, and I assume you know how to solder competently and keep this amp safe. So that's just a note there. If you're not sure on any of those points, don't attempt it. All this video is showing you is how to change these tubes over to these CV4039 Mullards. And when I said these tubes were cheap, and I'm sure you've all been kicking yourself saying you've not told us how much they cost, the postage was £5. These tubes cost me, with the postage, about £15 for the pair. Not for one, for the pair. They were £5 each. But if you go on eBay, they're about 15 quid with the postage. A little bit more maybe, I don't know. But they're around that. I mean, if they were £20, $20, whatever, they're cheap as chips, aren't they? And they're obviously they're military grade tubes, so what a result. And once we've gone through this wiring, you'll have some very cheap tubes. So again, I'm doing this to try and help people. So you know, you don't. I've spoken to people that's worked on these. They bought tubes. If they bought the JJs, you know, they're into £60 by the time they've had them delivered. You can put a set of these in, and let's face it, these are going to be better than JJs without a doubt, and probably as good as any tubes you can put in these amps. Right, so now we've got pin 2, which was here, wired up to pin 8. So if we look on here again, we'll just go into there. This time we've got pin 2 as no connection now, and we've wired to pin 8. So we'll just tick that, and that marks off that one's done. So what's next? So pin 6 is also free. 4, 5, 6. So we're going to remove the red and black wire there, which is pin 9, and connect it to pin 6. That's the next thing. Right, I've got a bit of a glow on here from the lights, and it's making the brightness on these a bit dull. So I'm just going to stick that glove there, because I just picked it up quick. Now I'm going to get some black cards to go over these just to help with the filming, but I just saw that and grabbed it and it's just worked. So now I've started fitting this screen resistor on here. I've not soldered it up yet, and I've changed my mind and decided that I'm not going to do this. And the reason is that this is going to get quite hot when this amp's cranked. I can't guarantee that when this gets pushed back down onto the board, that it's not going to push that down onto the wires. If this should burn up, the screen resistor, it will burn straight through those wires, and it's just not a good idea. And also it's not going to get a deal of air around it. So I'm going to remove that, change my mind, because obviously that's where you'd want it, that high, but the board's just going to crush it down when you put the board back down. The most I can get between that board and this chassis is my finger, so it's just not going to work. And that's about to there, which means that's going to be lying on those wires, and that's not a good idea, sadly. So again, you know, you look at things, and then sometimes, you know, we are modding here. Remember, you don't have to put screen resistors on this. You know, you don't have to. It should have screen resistors on, but they've run for many years without them, haven't they? So you shouldn't really need them on. Anyway, I'm going to get this off and we'll carry on with the wiring. So I'm going to wire this without the screen resistors, just so it's just easier for you when we're doing this. So we're just waiting for the soldering iron to warm up, but we've crimped him on. So that's the screen there, and that's now on pin 6. So if we count through 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and if we look on here and we go to 6, you can see there's our screen grid 2. So we can tick him off, and remember, you need to go through this again with the other tube as well. So screen grid 2. So that's looking pretty good. Excuse the glove, you know why he's there. It gets rid of some of the glare. So what's next? So we'll cross out the filaments. We can cross out number 2 because that's no connection, so we don't need that. We've crossed out pin 9 because we've got the control grid 1 on pin 8. We've crossed out the filaments because we don't need to touch those, and we've crossed out pin 2. We've put the plate or anode on pin 1. We've put the control grid 1 on pin 8, and the grid 2, the screen, we've put on pin 6. So that doesn't leave too much left to do. So now we need to be looking at the cathode. So the cathode needs to be on pin 7, but also the suppressor grid number 3, grid 3 on pin 3, all the 3s, needs to be connected to the cathode also to pin 7. So we need to make a little loop connector for that. So let's just go in here. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3. There's our cathode there. Just clean the tip of the iron. I'll just remove him, and he had no trouble getting him out. So he now needs to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So this pin here, pin 7, that's where he needs to go. And then we've just taken that from pin 3. Now we could have left that on pin 3 and just connected a lead over there, and we'd have just connected it back up to the cathode. So you don't have to move that. You could just put another piece of wire across there, but I've moved it because it's just how it looks when it's together. We'll cut that off, and then we'll bare that, take that around there, now normally I'd be trimming these wires and getting it a little more tidier, but I'm trying to leave it because if anyone wants to put this back onto EL84s for any reason, then they'll have the length on the cables. If I snip it, they might not have enough when they want to put it back, and then you've created them a lot of work. So that's there, and now we just need a loop of cable that goes across here to pin 3, and that's it. And you have wired up the CV4039. And obviously we've got to do the same on the other one. So there's our little jumper we've made up. We've tinned it, and we've just got to connect that from pin 7 to pin 3, and that one's all done. Right, those are all soldered up, so let's just go back and check. Let's check our work, make sure it's correct. Always go back and check your work. So let's go to pin 1, the anode. That's this blue wire here. Remember, we know you can write the wires down, the colours down, so you know which is which. If it makes it easy, it's actually blue, black. It's got a black line going through there. So that's pin 1. We go through. Pin 2 is no connection. Pin 3 is the suppressor grid, and that should be connected to pin 7. So if we go across there, there's 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. That's correct. 4 and 5 are the filaments. Pin 6. Oh, I've not soldered that. Forgot that. I'm not working with as much light as I've said with this aluminium, so I'm struggling a bit to see. I keep putting the other light on when I'm not filming, but I miss that. But anyway, pin 6 is the red wire, and pin 6 is the screen. That's good, and that is coming from the screens. The red wires are the screens, grid 2. So pin 7 is the cathode. That's the purple wire. Pin 7 is the cathode, and the control grid is pin 8. That's our white and black wire there, and that's it. That's complete. We just need to solder that up, and then I'll solder that up, and then we'll just have a look at the other one. Right, we've got that soldered up, so we'll be looking at this side now. And remember, always go back and check your work, and that's how I found that. If I hadn't have gone back and checked my work, we would have left that unsoldered, and that would not be good. Right, let's move on to this tube, and basically you can just go through the same thing. The only difference is the screens here. Now you've got 2 wires on here, and the reason for that is this wire here is the feed from the screens, and this wire, and I've already done this one, so this wire coming out the grommet is the feed from the screen connection, and this red wire is this wire here. So I've just connected on, so that's what you do. And if we can't well, they're a bit close together, aren't they? My word, that's not great. And you know, look at this. You know, this is the thing that you get with these amps, the Friday afternoon made. And we should tidy that up really, but I'm not going to, because I'm just doing this, just showing you this now, and this is what we need to focus on, getting this wired up properly. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and you can see I've already got that on there. Again, if we just look, pin 6 is grid 2, so we've got that done. So all you've got to do now is repeat the process that you did on this tube, and you'll be away to go with it. And that and if you know, if you're not putting any screen resistors in there or doing any other mods, you just put it back together, and it's basically, it's done. Now it is advantageous to power this up on a current limiter if you've got one, or a variac even. Current limiter's better. You don't have to, as long as you've been back and checked and double checked your work that you've not wired up anything wrong, you should be okay. I always start everything up on a current limiter, and the reason for that is that, you know, there is a chance you could put the tubes in and one of the tubes is dead short. You know, it's the brand new tubes, you don't know any history of them. We do get components that are faulty from time to time. You could switch on and suddenly it'd go short. You know, you can test a capacitor and it tests okay. As soon as you put voltage on it, it goes dead short. The current limiter is protection for that. So you really should always fire anything up on a current limiter. But if you haven't got one, you haven't got one. But double check your work. So that's it. I'm just going to wire this one up, and then we'll have a look at what's next. Right, I'm plugged in, and I've just got a little test speaker on, and we're running. I've got the current limiter on, so I've got this pinned down with a 100-watt bulb. I've got 189 volts going into it. So we can take some voltage measurements now and see where we are with this. Now that it's the screen voltage we're interested in, it's just making sure we keep that screen voltage down to 250 volts. So you can see we've got 226 volts there. Now you'll have a little bit more than that if you've got a 1.5k resistor in. I've got a 2.2 in there from the previous mods that I did. So what I'm going to do now, I'm going to just flick the current limiter off, and we're considerably over, look. So we need to change that resistor. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to change that, then I'm going to work out the wattage that you'll need for that, obviously. So Ohm's law. Now, as we increase that resistor as well, it will bring the bias down on these tubes. So we need to switch off, and we need to go and look for another resistor to replace the 2.2. And remember, when you're working on this, make sure the voltage has gone out of it. You can see the voltage is disappearing there. Right, I've had a bit of a think about this, and before we do anything else, I want to check the bias. So what we're going to do is we're going to run this amp up again, and we're going to check what's going across the cathode resistor, which is 100 ohms. So we're still on the current limiter, and we'll plug in and let things hot up. And there we've got 9 volts going across there, but of course we've got the current limiter on, so we're just going to let it warm up for a few minutes, and then, yes Beard, that's the sound of Beard, my other cat. We're going to let it warm up, and then we're going to just flick the current limiter off for a second, get the voltage, flick the current limiter back on, and then we're going to do the same with the plate to cathode voltage, and just the same again. Right, let's just flick the current limiter off and see what we get. Don't want to be too long, as that screen will be getting a bit hot with an extra 50 volts on it. But that's near enough. 13.3. Now we just need the plate to cathode voltage, and we can take that from here at the bottom there. And I'm just going to put some stronger glasses on before I go into there. I've got the current limiter on, so either of the outer two there, there's 3 on the bottom there, the middle one's centre tap, and you can see there we've got 236. So we're just going to flick the limiter off, and we're over. That's telling me this thing's biased a bit cool. 305. we've got there 305 back on the current limiter. We'll do the maths on this and then see where we are. Right, I said 100 ohms. I'd actually got 180 in here because of course I modded it for those other tubes, so I got 180. 10.7 watts they're running with that in there, with the 180 and the 2.2. But so I'm going to increase the 2.2. Of course, if I decrease this to get the dissipation up to 12 watts, that will reduce the screen voltage some more, of course, but it makes sense to get the screen voltage. It's not going to reduce it by 50 volts, so it might reduce it by 25. So we're still not, we're not going to be under with that. I mean, the easiest thing is to snip that out. Now you may find that, remember that this amp, I'm working off this amp, it's previously modded. You've got a 100 ohm resistor in yours, so you may find that you don't need to change that, but we shall see. So I'm going to snip that out now. Right, we're back on again. I've snipped out that 180 and I've put a 150 in, so getting ever closer to the value that's originally in these amps that you'll have in yours if you're doing this. So I've got the current limiter on still. We've got 231 volts up there, plate to cathode. I'm just going to flick the limiter off and go for the cathode reading. Now we'll have less volts on the screen now, and we've got 12.56 across the 12.56 across the resistor now, the cathode resistor. Still 304 on there, 304, so maybe the screen voltage hasn't gone down that much. 304, so we've got 12.56, and then we have 304 now, and now we've got 150 ohms. We're only in a rough window. We really need to measure that resistor to be deathly accurate, but we're not too keen on deathly accurate at the minute, are we? We just need to be in the window. So I'm just going to remove this, and we're going to go back onto the screens. So I don't think that that's going to make much difference on the screen voltage, 30 ohms. Let's see if it does. And no, none whatsoever. So still 292. But we can check our bias now, can't we? We're back on the current limiter. So let's check the bias again and see what we have. Right, so with that 150 ohm resistor in there, with 12 watts, right on the money. But of course, if that was 1.5k, we'd probably be a little bit over 12 watts. So here's back to that thing again, when people say, oh, the amp's cathode biased, we don't need to check the bias. Yes, you do. We've put these, if you put these tubes straight into your Wem Dominator, you need a 150 ohm resistor to run these at 12 watts. You've got 100 ohm in there. So these are going to be running at something around about 14 watts, 15 watts. That's going to be over, way over. So you do have to bias cathode bias. I get tired of hearing that when people say, oh, it's automatic bias, it's cathode bias. No, it isn't. These tubes are drawing a lot more current than you know, the Mullards or the JJs that you put in there. They're drawing more current. We can adjust that current. That's no problem. That's what the cathode resistor's for. We either increase or decrease the cathode resistor to get the right wattage. That's the idea of it. But we are going to have to increase that, and when we increase that, we probably are just going to have to go a shade more on the cathode resistor. But we've now got more of an idea of what we need to do with this. So we need to switch off, check the voltage is drained out of it. Again, check the voltage, make sure it's drained out. Don't cut any corners with safety. Right, we've got the current limiter on. Still, I've changed the 2.2 for a 4.7 now, I don't think that's going to be enough. I think we're going to need about 10k for this project. So let's go up and look at the meter and just see him there. Whoops, let's not get used to this. I'm going to flick the current limiter off and see what we've got. Well, that's better, 278, but that's still not enough. So I think 10k is what I've kind of got floating around in my head. So let's go straight to 10k. That's what I was thinking. Right, the power's out. So I'm jumpering this in. Now I'm doing all of this so you don't have to, because obviously, unless you're really good at this sort of thing, it's not really what you want to be doing, jumpering in resistors, but we've got to. So we'll plug in again, still on the current limiter. Screen voltage going up, and then you should see it come right down, and that has come down now, and that's now down to about 200 volts on the current limiter, and it's still dropping, and that's dropping even lower. So shall we give it a blast of the shall we give it a blast without the current limiter, see where we are? Oh oh, I think we'll just get away with that. Well, I was spot on there, wasn't I? 10k, that's bang on. And that's obviously, now we're getting a bit more conductance, so that's coming down, and we're at 239 volts on the main supply, so that's good, not down at about 232. So I think we've got it, or as Howard used to say to Marina, I think we've cracked it. So that's that. So now we need to check the bias. So what you need to do now, if we fit in these tubes, you need to cut out your 1.5k resistor and fit in a 10k resistor. We also need to check that 10k resistor and see what's going across it and what wattage of resistor we need. But we're going to check the bias first. And now we're going to check the cathode voltage, and you can see that's gone down to 7 now. It was 9 on the current limiter, so you can see by dropping that we've dropped the bias considerably. So what I'm hoping is that it's going to end up at about 100 ohms, and if it does, that will be good, because it means you don't have to take the board out to change the cathode resistor. Let's see. Remember, I'd already modded this amp, so we'd got that 180 ohms in, so I'm working from how I'd got this modded, because obviously I've got to take the board out, change the cathode resistor anyway. So 10.5 now we're at 10.5. That's the volts drop across the cathode resistor, 10.5. The cathode resistor is 150 ohms. So we've got those measurements. Back onto the current limiter, where we take this off, and then we're going to go onto the plate at the bottom there, and flick it up again, and now our plate volts, still pretty high plate volts, that plate to cathode, that, but not high enough for the, I mean, that is a little over, isn't it, on the tube, but then maybe the bias might be a bit under, but it's not massively over. 300, we'll call that 312, seeing as I'm in a good mood. 10.37 watts, 33 milliamps each of those tubes is drawing, so we are under. That explains the extra plate voltage that we've got there. So I think we need to come down. So what I'm going to do now is go and find a 100 ohms resistor and just stick it in and see where we are with this. Right, there we go. Plate to cathode 305 and dropping as these tubes conduct. The question is, where does that leave us with the bias? But that's more than acceptable, and that you can see that's coming down all the time. It's only 5 volts over, and yeah, so I'm just going to put the current limiter on, and we just need to put that 305 down on our notepad. Plate to cathode voltage 305. Now we need to just get the cathode drop across there, and now we've got, I think that's going to be borderline, just let that warm up, 8.7. So with that in hand, and we know it's a 100 ohm resistor, those figures in hand, back on the current limiter, we'll do the maths on that. 12.6 watts. Oh my word, just a tiny bit over, but I think that'll be okay. We're bang on 240 volts now, so yeah, so they're going to be spot on, anywhere between 12 and 12.6 depending on the fluctuation of the mains voltage. So that is an absolute result, because for you it means you don't have to take the board out, because you've already got a 100 ohm resistor. I'll obviously have to take the board out because I've been modding this, doing other things with it. So all you've got to do in your Dominator is rewire the tube bases and change your 1.5k screen resistor across the capacitor. Thank you, Shaft. And that's the postman with goodies. So that's where we are with this. So you rewire the sockets, just change your resistor across the capacitor there from 1.5 to 10k, and that gets you bang on with these tubes. So, and now you've got a pair of Mullard tubes in there, and you can buy these on eBay or straight from Langrex, and they're £5 each. That's £10 for 2 tubes. You've got probably £6 in postage, so you've got a set of Mullards for £16. What a result if you can do this work. I mean, if you've got to pay a tech to do this, there's no point really, unless you specifically want those tubes in it, and you know you're going to buy 4 or 5 pairs. They're so cheap, you could, you know, you could spend anything between £50 and £100 on one set of tubes. Well, you could buy, you know, 4 sets of these, and they probably last you a lifetime. In fact, probably 2 sets would. Of course, there's one downside, as always. So the tube retaining clips here are too long for these, because I think these are the same size as a 6BW6, but that's just a case of clipping these and rebending them and making them up again so they fit. Not a huge deal. Most people would do that. In fact, most of you lot probably do that better than me, because I'm rubbish at things like that. The only thing we need to do now, not all finished yet, because there's one thing we need to do. We need to measure now across that resistor, because of course 1.5k at 3 watts is what's in these amps normally. Of course now there's much more resistance, which means obviously we're holding back much more voltage, which means that resistor's working harder. So probably being 10k, we want a bigger wattage. Having said that, I'm looking at that, that's a 3 watt I've got now, and it's not changed colour yet. First signs is it starts to go a bit baked, and it's not done so far, but I dare say we'll need a bigger resistor. Now what we're going to do, just put the current limiter on. The final test is our screen voltage, which was the ultimate challenge from the start. Now, changing that screen resistor theoretically should have reduced the screen voltage. Let's see what we've got now. And that'll do me nicely. And you can see now by changing that cathode resistor down to 100 ohms, you can see now that's plenty. That's fine, absolutely fine, no problems at all. So leave the 100 ohm cathode resistor in, that's fine. You don't have to take the board out now. You just change that 1.5 to a 10k, and you'll have your screen voltage perfect. It doesn't matter if the screen voltage is below 250, in fact that's even better. So we connected across that dropping resistor between the center tap and the screens, and it says 56 volts, but I've got the current limiter on. So now I'm going to take the current limiter off. So current limiter's off. We've got 78 volts going across that. So 79 times 79, that's squaring it. That gives us 6,241, and we're going to divide that by 10,000. And that gives us 0.624 watts. So that is not massive, is it? But this amp isn't cranked, it's got no signal going through it. So when this amp starts to be cranked up, that's when the telling signs of that resistor will be. So I'm doing all these things now to get this right, so it's easy for you. You've just got to rewire the tube socket bases, and you've got the correct wattage of 10k resistor. So, and that's now crept up to 80 volts. So what we need to do now is put this amp on a dummy load and crank it with a 1 kilohertz sine wave through it, and get it on the scope as well, and just see what happens with that dropping resistor. See if it goes a funny colour and looks a bit baked. And also we'll be monitoring the voltage across it while we're doing that. So we'll unplug and get set up. So I've got 1 kilohertz sine wave going in, 0.3 volts, and you can see there we've got 78 volts going across that resistor. Now I don't have any signal going through the scope yet, so I'm just going to turn up the volume, watch the voltage across the dropping resistor. So now you can see it's going up, which means that resistor's working a bit harder. So let's just crank it, and now it's really going up, and we're baking it. Now if we'd got screen resistors on this amp, that wouldn't be getting quite as much hammer, because obviously they'd be soaking up some of the current, and this really is all about current. Now the amp's flat out, and we can see that we've now got 139 volts going across that resistor. So we need to go and do the maths again. So got the resistor down there. Not really baking, is it, that? 1.8 watts is needed. That's 3 watts. So it's borderline. Having said that, it's not showing any signs of getting hot, and it's not baking either. So I don't know on that one. Those bands quickly change colour on there when they start getting swaged, and that's been swaged now for a considerable time. Let's turn the volume down. Now, crank it back up. Now I've been looking through my resistors, and the only 10k resistor I can find bigger than 3 watts is 10 watts. So I'm not really, that's a pretty huge resistor. We'll go across there though. So I would put a 5 watt resistor across there, 10k at 5 watts. I think that'll be enough. You've got more than double then, haven't you? And you're safe. But that 3 watt is holding out pretty well. But really, it's only, what, 1.2 watts over, and you really want to be a little bit more over than that. but as I say, that's not showing any signs. So what we're going to do now is we're just going to go back onto the cathode. There. And we're going to check the screen voltage when the amp is cranked. So 180 volts, but that's on the current limiter. So 232 volts. Let's crank the amp. And you can see it's dropping that screen voltage down now to 175 there. So that's the amps there about, that's about 10 o'clock on the volume, number 4, halfway. Number 6, flat out. So I think that's a wrap. Now there is other tubes that you can put in this amp that you can get from Langrex as well. Let me have a bit of a brevet in some boxes up here. In fact, I've just found one here. So this tube is CV4043. I'm just going to get it out of the box. These are brimers though, and you can actually get these in brimers also. So Brimer did these and Mullard, and they sell both on the website. I think they're both the same price, Brimers and the Mullards. I went for the Mullards, but it's just what you prefer. So if you prefer the Brimers, you can have a set of Brimers in there. So there's CV4043, and you can see again 7149. That actually is a 6BW6 military grade tube. So I'm just going to switch off before I start sizing it up. That is about the same, not much in it. Download the data sheet for that, CV4043. They dissipate at 13.2 watts. They're a seriously heavy duty tube. Can't remember the screen voltages, but the plate voltages are 300. No, they're not, sorry, 352 rings a bell. I don't know why I remember weird figures like that. 350 volts. Tell you what, let's download the sheet, or just get the tablet and have a look. So we're on the type.org website, and you can see 6BW6 there. So if we go to the bottom and we click here, if we go in, this is the part that we are really interested in. So let's just let's get a pointer and do some pointing. So we have a heater voltage, 6.3 volts, 450 milliamps. So really good there on the heater current. That's considerably low. Maximum anode voltage is 350. I don't know where I got 352 from. That's me. Maximum dissipation 13.2. And the screen voltage is 310 maximum. So these tubes are far more flexible than the ones I've put in here. We could have put those in. So they're an even better tube, really, if you want to wire the bases for those. And you would probably not have to change, I don't know, it depends. I mean, you've got to check the bias, and it's just if they're drawing so much current on the bias, then you've really got to reduce the bias. These tubes do draw more current, as we've seen. So that's an option. Now if we look here, this pin 1 is the control grid as opposed to pin 2. Now you may find if you've got an earlier Dominator, you may be connected to pin 1, but that's no big deal. The cathode is the same, pin 3. The filaments 4 and 5. Pin 6 is no connection. The anode is on 7, and the screen grid is on pin 8. The suppressor grid is on pin 9. So all you've got to do with these tubes is remove the screen from pin 9, grid 2, and connect it to pin 8, and then just connect pin 9 to the cathode. They're even easier to do, much easier. But then you've still got to do all the measurements and everything else and make sure that it's the bias correctly. And if you have to increase the cathode resistor, then you're going to end up with more volts on the screen. So you may find that you've gone over your 310, you may not, but you will probably get those to work in here. And remember, you can bias these a little bit more. You know, we've got these at 12 to 12.6. These will go up to 13. So yeah, so that's another really good tube there. Also, if you've got an amp with 6 BW6s in, that's a direct replacement. But again, you must check the bias. You know, just stick them in, even though it's cathode biased. So that's another useful tube there, very useful tube. Why have I not done this one first? Well, there's just a mixture out of the 3 I've used, because there is another one we're going to look at in a minute. Obviously, that's easy to do. I chose one that's just a little more difficult. If you can do the 4039, then this one is easy. So prototype, the other one had a prototype as well, prototype number. So CV4043. Now we do have another one somewhere, and I'm trying to find that one, and that might be in a box up here. We're going to have a bit of a brevet in this box, and yes we do. So this tube that we've got here is CV4055. This is another 12 watt dissipation tube. Let's hone in, and there it is. Let's just put the light on for that one so you can see it. There we go, CV4055. These are primers, and the other one was primer. So this is a primer, and the CV4043 are primers as well. And you can buy these from Langrex, and they're all roughly about the same price. They're an absolute steal once you get used to putting them in. It's like anything. If you can do a bit of this, just flick that off again because we've got the light in the middle. If you can do this sort of thing, you know, you're on a winner. They're just cheap as chips. Let's have a look then. This is the information we want again. So let's get the pointer. 750 milliamps on the current, on the filaments, on the heaters. So same as the 4039. 300 volts on the plates and 300 volts on the screen. So again, this one, even again, you know, you've virtually EL84 voltages there. Dissipation on this tube is 12 watts there, 2.5 on the screen. And let's look at the pin out again, and you can see pin 1 wouldn't have to be connected to pin 2. The cathode is pin 3. Actually, no, I've just looked at that wrong. Let's look again. Pin 2 is the control grid, grid 1, so that's already connected. The cathode's already connected. The filaments are the same. No connection for pin 6. Pin 7 is the anode, that's connected. So all we've got to do with this tube is move pin 9, the cable on pin 9 on your amp, to pin 8, and then the suppressor grid, just connect it to the cathode at pin 3. So those would work as well. And so there's another tube, and again they're about the same price. So again, a pretty easy changeover there if you wanted to do those. So, but I've done the 4039, a little bit more tricky to do that one. So 3 tubes there that are highly useful, and not just in this amp either. You know, there's other amps you could use them in. As long as you can wire the tube bases, you can use them in anything. Fixed bias amps as well, I dare say. There's be no problem with that. So anything with EL84s, you can either use these or you can use the other tubes. And these are top drawer tubes. They're going to last years. You know, buy yourself 2 or 3 sets of those, and they should last you a good long time. So all that remains now is for me to get this amp put back together, get this board out, change that cathode resistor. And if we look at the resistor there, you could see that's handled that really well. Doesn't seem to be working hard at all. So maybe a 3 watt would do it. I think I'd be more comfortable with a 5. But yeah. Right, I'll get this put back together and then we can have a listen, can't we? Right, so I thought we'd have just a quick look at this Langrex website. So you can see we've got this tube on here, this CV4039 that we fitted. We look there, total price £5. Now you can have them matched, just honing with my finger, for an extra £2, so that's £7 a tube, so that's £14 plus postage. So yeah, you can see they're really cheap. And there's quite a lot of stuff on this site. You go in, quite a lot of vintage stuff, germanium transistors. You can see on there. Just move this across a bit so we can see everything. See on there, loads of stuff, more germanium transistors. On there, so we've got those. Let's go back to home again. See what else we've got. So we've got diodes. Zener diodes. On there. Some of you have probably already been on this site before. And ICs. Oh. A tube wandering amongst those. Pretty interesting website and some good bargains to be had on here. Valve bases. Look what we've got there. So yes, I'm sure if you're looking for something specific, for vintage tubes, tube base or something, you'll find it on here. Valve test equipment. Valve bias checker. Let's have a smooches at that. There we go. And you've got all the semiconductors going on there, capacitors, bits and bobs, and pots and stuff. Capacitors, 2 amp fuses. That's what I tend to put in some of the plugs. I've got some of those, although I didn't get those from here, but pack of 10, £1.80, that's not bad. So yeah, so there we go. So that's Langrex. Give the site a visit. They are down in, do you believe, contactors. Let's have a look. Sussex, West Sussex, in Billinghurst, West Sussex. Right, I've just got this all back together and all looking good. So the pilot light dropped to bits, just on a handheld, so it's only a little clip filming. So you can see I put a new pilot light in there, and I found a nice vintage square one to go in there. He's gone in a treat as a result. 10k resistor on there, you can see. Sorted that, and I've done the retaining clips on the tubes, just trimmed them down and bent the ends, and they've worked to treat. We've got our cathode resistor in, you can see there, just adjacent with the tube, the sand resistor. So all good to go. It's up and running now, everything's fine. We just need to get it back in its case and give it a blast. Right, so I've got this Wem back together and it's all looking good, so we'll give it a listen. Nice bright amps these. Plenty of top on there. That's all the treble off now. Pick up. Single coil. top on that one than the other channel. There we are, a rusty demo there. Oh, that explosion of dog was a delivery. So, but what's in it? What is in this package? Well, that'll be in the next video. So we should pop him over here. So where was I before I was interrupted by a dog? Yes. So there we go, that's the Wem Dominator MK3 15 watt amp there, and we've put those CV4039s in it, and it sounds splendiferous. So I'll leave all the information in the description for the tubes, where you can get them from, whatever, all the rest of it, and some of the maths that I did on the bias and stuff, just to give you some ideas there. But there's plenty of my videos doing biasing and stuff on these. There's quite a few videos, so you know, sift through them, and you should find all the info that you're looking for. So that'll do it for this one. So thanks for watching. You all take care, and I'll see you all in the next video. Bye bye for now.